I'm Dan Stevens. I'm playing Matthew Crawley, who is the surprised and surprising heir to Downton Abbey.
I'm Rob James-Collier, and I play Thomas, the duplicitous, conniving, low-down scum footman. I think from Thomas's point of view, there's a slight bit of resentment towards Dan's character because he doesn't perceive him as being a proper gentleman per se, so he doesn't see why he should have to serve someone who he almost sees as equal to himself. Thinks it's he's beneath the title kind of thing. So yeah, so there's a sort of slight bitterness and a resentment from Thomas's point of view because he thinks he's a fake.
The interesting thing about Matthew coming in to Downton Abbey is that he rocks upstairs and downstairs, and that upstairs don't really know who he is or where he's from and his background, and downstairs I think expect him to be a lot more uncouth and sort of unlearned in the ways of how you behave in a big sort of country estate like Downton. And in the end I think surprises them all, but certainly to begin with, you know, Thomas comes in and is quite rude in sort of assuming that Matthew's just not going to know how things are done. Well, I think it takes a good couple of episodes to get the measure of the place and how he's going to really deal with the upstairs lot and the downstairs lot. He's not really an upstairs. He's sort of on the stairs, sort of in the middle, and eventually he sort of finds his place.
Just as this status between upstairs and downstairs, there is a status and a pecking order below stairs, and you've got like the head honcho, aka the daddy, Mr. Carson, played brilliantly by Jim, the enforcer Carter, who takes no stick, but he says jump, everyone says how high and stands to attention, so it goes, the butler is sort of in charge, particularly on the male side, of all the footmen and the hall boys and stuff like that, and then the valets are below them, and then the footmen and hall boys and kitchen staff and so on and so forth. So that's Carson, the butler, is in control of all that. And then on the female side, you've got Mrs. Hughes, who's the housekeeper, and she keeps all the women in check. She's responsible for the maids and the ladies' maids and so on and so forth. There's an us and a them downstairs as well, because there's a divide between the servants, and you've got Thomas and O'Brien on one side who are kind of duplicitous and scheming and very ambitious, and then you've got the rest of them, the Bates and the Annas, the ladies' maids, and you can see there's two sides downstairs, and it can get quite nasty sometimes. There's an us and a them downstairs and an us and a them across the class divide.
He comes in and doesn't quite understand the full set that they've got. I think he's used to having a sort of a cook and a maid, and then he comes in and he's given this butler, sweet man Molesley, who to begin with he thinks is completely irrelevant and useless. I mean, not useless, but he doesn't see his purpose in his household, and is quite embarrassed to have this chap sort of wanting to put his cufflinks in and things like that. But eventually Robert, who runs the joint, steers him in the right sort of direction, and sort of trains him up in the ways of how you would be an earl and run an estate. He represents the modern way, and he starts to sympathise with characters like Sybil, who, you know, she's the sort of young women's rights fanatic, and sort of, you know, very much sympathises with the rise of the women's movement and the progressive thinking, really. And so he initially doesn't see the need for all these staff and things like that, but eventually he sort of learns about the giant sort of living organism that is Downton Abbey, and everything that sort of, and everyone that feeds it and moves around in it, and, you know, it's a massive operation. It's a sort of giant thing, really.
Alistair Bruce is the oracle, man. I mean, I've not asked him a question yet that he hasn't provided the answers. Do you know what I mean? I've even asked him about other questions like love and life in general, and he's just like, he's unbelievable. He's a sage. He's got all the answers to life's questions. But no, you do a little bit of research, obviously, on the internet. You go down the library and you read up on it. But you know, there's no substitute for someone like Alistair who's seen it, lived it, and breathed that kind of life. And thank God, he's there every day on set. So, you know, you can just go to him, whether it be a question about etiquette, even down to body language, how you stand when you're waiting and stuff like that. You can ask him anything and he will invariably come up with the answers. I can go to him with questions like, I had an idea of, with Thomas, of seeing a difference. I wanted to see a difference with him in terms of how he behaves and how he speaks and his deportment and body language upstairs than when he was downstairs. I wanted to see not an obvious change but subtle changes, and I went to Alistair with that. Would that be okay for his body language to completely more relaxed? You know, he's dropping his INGs and his T's, you know, when he's speaking, and he's slouching a little bit in his chairs, and he's brilliant with that. He'll compromise and he'll help you try and find a way, whilst remaining true to life, true to the Edwardian times and stuff like that. So yeah, it's fantastic. You weren't allowed to show, certainly upstairs, show any feelings, any sort of emotions. You looked straight ahead. You kind of didn't speak unless you were spoken to. Anything that's being said at the table, you shouldn't really be reacting to or showing that you're listening in any way. So in many ways, it makes acting easier because they're going to be on you, but you can't show anything. So how do they know you're not acting?
The constraints thing is interesting because that is essentially why period dramas are interesting. It's you know, seeing situations in which constraints are imposed that we don't live with anymore, and there are a lot of them, as Rob says, in this house and in this society. And even for a character like Matthew coming in, there's constraints that he's not used to and sort of, you know, rubbing up against, and that's part of the drama. That's part of the fun, is, you know, what you're allowed to get away with and you know, what you're not. I mean, normally you get a script and you flick through and you go, where are my bits? And you go, oh, okay. And then I found myself reading all the other scenes in this as well, which is a compliment, I suppose. No, it's an incredibly rich, you know, fabric of scenes. There's like 18 main characters, really. There's no one sort of principal role. You know, everyone's got their moment and their little storylines, you know, weaving around, and it's and each scene complements the other. You know, you've got a scene that perhaps happens upstairs, and then you've got the sort of downstairs, press the red button punditry from you know, downstairs, you know, having just witnessed what's just happened or discussing what's going on in the house. It's I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, I remember reading. Yeah, getting it. It's the first time that I'd read anything good in a while, and, you know, I'll be honest. And it was one like Dan said, I read from back to front, just couldn't stop reading it. Came off the page, and in rehearsals with Brian Percival, who directs the first episode, he was kind of, it's just one of them. It's so well written that you don't have to try and bring anything to the words, just say them, and it'll come out. The scenes will work because it's so, you know, beautifully written. And he's got a tremendous economy in his writing, you know. Like Dan mentioned, there's 18 like principal cast members, not including guests who come into each episode. Yeah, he manages to tell pretty much all their stories in each episode, and he's only got 1 hour. And to do that and to do it well, which he does, I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Violet is Isabel's great nemesis, really, and in a way that Mary is Matthew's nemesis. Yeah. Isabel really has her work cut out to fit in, and also to come in at that level of sort of grande dame-ness. And yeah, Violet softens eventually, but they have a good couple of episodes of coming to blows and, you know, little snipes at each other. It's great.
The cast, like you say, it's a who's who, and it's exactly where I want to be at this stage. I mean, in terms of like experience and CV, I'm probably like the weak link on the cast, but it's exactly, I wouldn't have it any other way, because when you're with the likes of Jim Carter and Phyllis Logan and Penelope Wilton and all that, you literally have to punch above your weight just to keep up with them, which is great, because that's the only way as an actor you can get better and progress, by watching them and learning. And to be like with a legend like Big Jim, to be in scenes with him, the gravitas that he's got, not just in his voice, his whole kind of...
Just the eyebrows.